They were moments away from signing a $3.2 billion merger when a quiet voice from the back of the room brought everything to a halt. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a shareholder. He was just the night guard. And yet, 5 words from his mouth made a billionaire freeze and question everything. What could a single-dad veteran possibly know that no one else did? Stay with this story, because sometimes the man holding the door sees what those in power overlook. If stories of courage, second chances, and the quiet strength of ordinary people move you, consider subscribing. It's free, and it helps us bring you more stories that truly matter. Now, let's begin. At the very top of Hemsworth Tower, behind a wall of glass that wrapped around the clouds, silence hung like the tension before a storm. Everyone was waiting. The air conditioning hummed quietly above a long obsidian table where 12 executives sat, frozen. Pens in hand, coffee untouched, eyes locked on the woman who'd just entered. Her heels clicked with precision on the marble floor. Her presence didn't fill the room, it conquered it. Helena Wolfe, billionaire, COO, heiress to Wolfe Tech, the last independent titan in a world of mergers. She was dressed in gray silk and steel, tailored trench coat over a matte black power suit. No jewelry, but a slim platinum watch. Her blonde hair was twisted into a perfect knot, not a single strand out of place. She did not smile. She never did. Today was the day she would sign over 32 years of legacy into the hands of Hale Capital, a $3.2 billion merger. The media had called it the unshakable union. Investors were euphoric. Her board was relieved. And the man standing beside her, Nathan Hale, her fiancé, was already smiling. He always smiled when he won. "Shall we begin?" Helena said, her voice crisp, cool, and devoid of doubt. The lawyers slid papers forward. Cameras flashed silently. The CFO nodded. One signature. That was all it would take. Helena uncapped the pen. And that's when it happened. From the far back corner of the room, near the polished brass exit sign and the untouched water station, someone spoke. A single voice. Low, steady, gravelly, like it hadn't been used in weeks. "Don't sign that, ma'am." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even particularly loud. But somehow, it cut through the room like a chisel on glass. Everything stopped. A chair scraped. Someone coughed. Then silence returned. But this time, it was sharp. Everyone turned. Helena froze mid-signature, pen hovering. The voice had come from a man leaning against the janitor's cart. He wore an old army jacket under a standard building-issued cleaning apron. The patch on his shoulder had faded. The name tag just read, Caleb. Helena blinked. "What did you say?" The man straightened. His posture wasn't sloppy. It was military, controlled. He didn't flinch under a dozen glares. "I said, don't sign that," he repeated. "Not yet." The boardroom erupted in whispers. "Is this a joke?" "Security." But before anyone could move, Nathan stepped forward with that smirk, the one he reserved for those he considered beneath him. "It's all right," Nathan said smoothly. "Let the man speak. This should be entertaining." Helena didn't take her eyes off Caleb. Something in his face. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't disrespect. It was warning. Quiet. Calculated. And deeply unsettling. "Who are you?" she asked, the pen still in her hand, but her grip loosening. "My name's Caleb Rourke," he said simply. "Former captain, Army Financial Corps, Strategic Audit Division." Someone at the table laughed. "And now you mop floors?" "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. "And apparently, floors aren't the only thing needing cleaning around here." A beat of silence. Then Helena spoke again. "Why shouldn't I sign?" Caleb didn't move. "Because that contract isn't what it looks like. Section 14B has a conversion clause buried under amortized assets. You sign, and Wolfe Tech's IP goes to Hale Capital within 6 months, automatically. And you lose voting rights, permanently." A murmur spread like wildfire. Nathan's expression flickered. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, suddenly less amused. "This man doesn't even work for us. He's a maintenance worker." Helena turned slowly to her fiancé. Is it true? Of course not, Nathan replied. It's technical jargon. He's clearly mistaken. But Caleb spoke again, calm, unbothered. I memorized the numbers. You've got 3 different shell entities cross-listed in the Caymans. I saw the disposal schedule for Wolftech's overseas patents. Your lawyer left the file open in the executive washroom, page 112. There's also a signature there. Yours, Mr. Hale. Dated 2 weeks ago. The room dropped 10 degrees. Helena didn't blink. How do you know all this? Caleb looked at her, straight on. His voice softened, not with fear, but gravity. Because I used to do this job for the Pentagon. I tracked war fraud, embezzlement, black budget bleedouts. People died over missing zeros. I know what deception smells like. And your fiancé stinks. No one laughed this time. Helena put the pen down. Her fingers twitched slightly, like the chill had reached her bones. Nathan stepped closer, voice rising. This is a hostile stunt. You have no proof. You're nothing. But Caleb didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at Helena and asked, May I show you something? She nodded slowly. From the pocket of his apron, Caleb pulled out a small flash drive, sealed in a plastic evidence bag. It clinked softly against the glass table. Check that. You'll find every clause, every transfer, every offshore link, and your fiancé's emails authorizing the override of your board's protective clauses. Helena didn't speak. She stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. The board members murmured. Caleb picked up his mop and quietly added, I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, ma'am. I just thought you deserved to know before you handed over your family's legacy. And with that, he turned and walked out. The doors closed behind him. No one moved. Helena stood at the head of the room, motionless, pen on paper, eyes wide open. Her hand did not sign. She looked up at Nathan. For the first time in a decade, her voice cracked just enough to be human. Get out! Before Caleb Rourke ever stood in a billionaire boardroom with a mop in one hand and the truth in the other, he'd worn a very different uniform and walked a very different path. 10 years ago at West Point, he was the kind of man others followed without question. Sharp mind, steady hands. Numbers whispered to him like music. Patterns appeared where others saw chaos. He didn't just work in financial strategy, he shaped it. Within 5 years, Caleb had served as the youngest financial intelligence officer ever embedded with Joint Command operations overseas. It wasn't the thrill of deployment that drove him. It was justice, precision, accountability. Caleb believed in the system, believed that if the numbers didn't add up, someone needed to answer for it. And that belief nearly destroyed him. The operation that changed everything wasn't front-page news. It was buried in a black budget contract, millions earmarked for equipment that never existed, funneled through 3 logistics firms in Delaware, none of which had real addresses. Caleb traced every cent, brought the evidence to command, and then came the silence. No investigation, no hearings, just whispers behind closed doors. Then the transfer, then the reprimands. They didn't deny his math, they resented his noise. 6 months later, he was honorably discharged with a file marked lack of unit cohesion. A polite way to say he made the wrong people uncomfortable. That day, he handed in his bars, went home, told his wife they were starting over. But starting over didn't go as planned. Her name was Elise. Caleb met her at university before West Point. She had laughed at how he drank coffee with a straw to avoid staining his teeth. She had danced barefoot in the kitchen and whispered bedtime facts to their daughter about stars and owls. She was a nurse during the pandemic, and one day, she didn't come home. 3 weeks from first cough to final breath. Caleb couldn't even hold her hand in the end. Just a tablet screen, just the sound of her breath slowing. And then, silence again. After that, the world shrank. His dreams did too. Gone were the policy briefings, the financial councils, the crisp suits and PowerPoints for defense officials. Now it was night shifts, plastic badge, steel-toed boots, a mop in one hand and in the other, his daughter's lunchbox every morning. Lucy. 9 years old, freckles scattered like stardust across her cheeks. She had her mother's smile and her father's eyes. Eyes that noticed too much, too early. She never asked why they had moved into a one-bedroom apartment, or why her dad folded his bed up each morning so she could do her homework at the table. But she did ask why people looked past him, why they didn't see who he used to be. "You were important, right?" she said once, curled beside him with a worn blanket. "You were someone smart." Caleb smiled. "I still am." "Then why don't they listen to you?" He didn't have the heart to answer that question. Not yet. But Lucy had a way of watching him, watching the way he read, the way he wrote strings of numbers down on napkins, how he paused in front of news tickers and murmured, "That's not right," before calculating something in his head and whispering a correction. One evening, she stood on a chair at the kitchen counter while he cooked spaghetti and said, "You know, I think you're still working." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah?" She nodded. "Like, undercover. Like a superhero with math." That made him laugh for the first time in weeks. But behind the laugh was a truth he rarely admitted. He did still see things others missed. He could still read balance sheets like stories. He did remember every clause in every contract he'd ever reviewed. And when he passed corporate offices now, all gleaming glass and whispered deals, he didn't feel envy. He felt caution. Because the same tricks, shell companies, off-books clauses, boardroom betrayals, they hadn't gone away. They'd just gotten better at hiding. So Caleb watched and waited. And on his desk, next to Lucy's framed drawing of their family, was a locked box. Inside it, flash drives, documents, folders marked with names no one else remembered. He told himself it was just habit, just a way to stay sharp. But deep down, he knew the truth. One day, someone would make a mistake, a real one, and when they did, he'd be ready. Helena Whitmore had never been publicly contradicted in a boardroom, not once, not even when she was 28 and closed her first billion-dollar deal with Wall Street wolves twice her age. She had always commanded the room until that night. "Don't sign that, ma'am." His voice still rang in her ears, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. It had been low, rough, and somehow exact. She remembered how her pen hovered over the line, how Nathan's hand had tensed ever so slightly on her chair, how the silence in the room had turned brittle. The moment passed quickly. She had regained composure in seconds, offered a cold smile, and instructed security to escort the janitor out. She even signed the preliminary agreement to save face. But later that night, alone in her penthouse with the skyline glittering behind her, Helena couldn't shake the feeling. That man, his eyes, not pleading, not desperate, focused, knowing. She had instructed HR to freeze his credentials, effective immediately, but something gnawed at her as she pulled up her laptop. Against her better judgment, she entered the internal staff database and typed in the name she overheard from the badge as he was led away. Caleb Rourke. She expected a blank file, maybe a contractor line, outsourced through a cleaning agency with no real information. What she found instead made her sit up straight. United States Army, Financial Intelligence Division. Rank, Captain, honorably discharged. Top 5% West Point Graduate Awards in Strategic Analysis, Threat Detection, and Operational Finance. Former advisor to Joint Command Ops, Internal Audit Investigations. Then came the publications. Peer-reviewed articles in military finance journals. One titled, Digital Camouflage, How Shell Corporations Obscure Defense Spending. Another, The Human Cost of Misallocated Funds in Conflict Zones. The man had written about contracts eerily similar to the one she was about to sign. Helena leaned back in her chair. Who was he? And why was he mopping floors? She clicked through security clearance levels. She had access to everything, but his final file was redacted in parts, even at her level. She pulled out her phone and called her assistant. Get me the full file on Caleb Rourke. Bypass legal if needed, and don't mention this to Nathan. Understood, Ms. Whitmore. She hung up and stared at the screen. Her finger tapped slowly against the edge of the laptop. She wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the way she expected. She was unsettled. No one questioned Helena Whitmore, not in public, not in private, not without consequence. But this man hadn't begged for anything. He hadn't groveled or demanded. He'd just warned her, as if he knew something she didn't, as if her billion-dollar empire was a chess game, and he'd seen 3 moves ahead. And that rattled her, more than she wanted to admit. The next morning, she stood at her office window, watching the sun reflect off the mirrored towers below. Nathan was on his way in. The official contract was set to be signed at noon. She should have been excited. This merger would catapult her holdings into the aerospace sector, triple her influence overnight. Everyone called it bold. But now, a different voice echoed in her mind. "Don't sign that, ma'am." Why? What did he see? She turned back to her desk and opened the draft of the merger agreement. And for the first time in her career, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of doubt. Because somewhere in the legalese and fine print, something didn't sit right. She hadn't read it herself in detail. Nathan and the legal team had walked her through the key points. But now she realized she hadn't asked the right questions. She'd been trusting. That realization hit harder than she expected. She had built her empire on discipline, independence, and scrutiny. But this deal, driven by emotion, by the history with Nathan, was the first time she'd coasted. And it took a janitor to notice. Her pride flared. She hated that it was true. But Helena Whitmore hadn't survived in this world by ignoring red flags. So she did what she hadn't done in a long time. She began to dig. By noon, when Nathan walked into the room with his smooth charm and perfect tie, Helena didn't rise to greet him. She stayed seated, reading. "Everything all right?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, without looking up, she said, "Tell me again about the Cayman clause on page 73. Nathan blinked. "What clause?" Her eyes lifted. Exactly. Caleb Rourke didn't sleep that night. He sat at the small kitchen table in their 2-bedroom apartment, a yellowed lampshade casting soft light on the old military notebook he kept with him always. Numbers filled the pages, rows, patterns, formulas. But tonight, the numbers weren't abstract. They were dangerous. He had only glimpsed the merger contract from the boardroom, but that was enough. His mind didn't forget numbers. It filed them, indexed, cross-checked, analyzed. It wasn't arrogance. It was how his brain worked. And something didn't add up. The issue wasn't in the headline figures. No, those were immaculate. But tucked in the far-right column of Appendix A, there had been a breakdown of post-merger equity allocation. Something subtle. A shift of 1.6% in preferred shares, moved not to Hemsworth Holdings, but to a holding company registered offshore. It would go unnoticed unless you cross-referenced it with Hemsworth's historical dividend policy. And if you ran those numbers across 5 years, the result was a projected loss of voting control. Quiet. Surgical. Legal on paper. Fraud in essence. Caleb closed his notebook. He had seen this before, in Kandahar, in Berlin, in places where numbers buried truths. The man behind this? It wasn't hard to guess. Nathan Hale. He'd read the profile, decorated venture capitalist, savvy in aerospace acquisitions, and engaged to Helena Whitmore. But Caleb had seen men like him in uniform too, men who won trust, then sold it for profit. He knew he couldn't stay silent, but he also knew no one would listen. He'd tried once, exposing a laundering ring inside a military supplier. It got buried. He got buried. Honorably discharged, yes, but marked as disruptive. The irony never left him. This time, he would try again. Caleb typed a brief anonymous report, stripped of identifiers, and sent it through the internal audit channel marked Urgent Anonymous Whistleblower. Then he made a copy, printed it, just in case. He slipped the printout into his bag before heading out. Across town, Lucy Rourke sat quietly in the back row of her public school music room, legs swinging beneath her chair. She was 9 years old, quick-minded, and deeply observant. Most of the other kids thought she was shy. She wasn't. She simply watched more than she spoke. Miss Alden, their teacher, had asked them to write letters of kindness as a class project, something nice they could give to someone they admired. Lucy thought of her dad, but she'd already written him a note last week, and he still carried it in his wallet. Then she thought of the nice lady who had visited their classroom once, Helena Whitmore. Lucy didn't know her name then, but she remembered her eyes. Tired, smart eyes. She had visited their school as a donor months ago and watched the kids play violin. Lucy had smiled at her, and the lady had smiled back. Just a little. Today, Lucy decided she would write her a letter. At Whitmore Tower, Helena sat with her legal team reviewing revised drafts. She had called off the signing, temporarily. Officially, she claimed due diligence concerns. Unofficially, she was chasing a gut feeling she couldn't explain. Still, she hadn't told Nathan. Not yet. There was a knock. Her assistant entered, holding a slightly crumpled envelope. "This came through your daughter's school drop-off this morning. Unmarked. But might be something you want to see." Helena raised a brow. "From who?" "No name. Just this note." Inside was a child's letter, folded carefully. On top was a cover page, typed, crisp, with words that froze her. Projected post-merger share allocation. Conflict analysis. As Helena scanned the page, her eyes widened. Someone had cross-referenced internal dividend histories, with asset shifts embedded in the Hale agreement. There were formulas, clean, concise, footnotes in the margin, estimating the exact moment her voting control would quietly dissolve. And beneath it, written in pencil, "I don't know if you'll believe this, but someone should, because numbers don't lie, but people do." No signature, no name, just that line. Helena held her breath. She knew what this meant, and she knew exactly who it came from. Caleb. That evening, Lucy skipped into their apartment, hair messy from the playground, shoes muddy with joy. Caleb, still in his uniform, was hunched over his notes. She dropped her bag and grinned. "Daddy, I gave someone your report." Caleb blinked. "My what?" "The paper you left in the printer. I thought it looked important, so I put it in my kindness letter." He stood, stunned. "To who?" "I don't know. The lady from the violin day. You said she looked like someone who could listen." For a long moment, Caleb couldn't speak. Then he knelt down, pulled her close, and whispered, "You might have just saved a lot of people, Lucy." She beamed. "I just wanted to help you." "Because you always help me." Nathan Hale always smiled the same way. It was the kind of smile that could melt frost off glass, the kind that looked perfect in photos. White teeth, relaxed jaw, a confident tilt of the head. It had graced magazine covers, investor luncheons, and late-night television. Helena had once described it as presidential, but lately it made her stomach tighten. She sat across from him in their penthouse living room, the city lights flickering behind them like restless stars. Her hands were folded, posture rigid. Nathan, barefoot in designer slacks and a cashmere pullover, held a glass of wine, legs casually crossed. "I went over Appendix A again," Helena said, voice steady. Nathan took a slow sip. "And?" "There's a discrepancy. I want to know why your firm is assigning preferred equity to a separate offshore account, instead of folding it into Hemsworth Holdings." He didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled lightly, soft, condescending. "Darling, that's legal scaffolding, tax deferral, nothing more. You know how these structures work. Everyone does it." She narrowed her eyes. "You didn't mention it during the board review?" He tilted his head. "I didn't think it mattered." She didn't speak. He leaned forward, placing his glass down gently on the mahogany table between them. "Helena, you've been under a lot of stress. The press, the merger pressure, your father's legacy. And now some night guard throws a tantrum and suddenly you're doubting everything?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not doubting everything. I'm verifying what I'm about to commit to." Nathan smiled again, that perfect, calm, reasonable smile. The one that made people trust him when they shouldn't. "Then verify it. I have nothing to hide." But he didn't offer answers, only charm. and that frightened her more than if he had shouted. Across the city, Caleb was stacking chairs in the building's event hall, dressed in his navy blue security uniform, name badge slightly crooked. His suspension had been lifted, but his hours were cut. The message was clear: stay quiet or stay gone. He didn't stay quiet. After the whistleblower report mysteriously disappeared from the audit system, Caleb had started keeping printouts. He stored them in plastic sleeves under floorboards in his apartment and committed every suspicious line to memory. Still, without access to official files, he could only speculate. So he watched. Every evening, he monitored shifts, hallways, access logs, movement patterns. And on a Thursday night, sometime past 11:30, the hallway cameras caught something strange. Caleb, stationed at the first-floor east wing, noticed the elevator to the executive floor open, and Nathan Hale step out. He wasn't supposed to be there. Only senior staff had clearance at that hour, and Nathan, technically, was still an outside executive, pending merger approval. Caleb watched from the shadows. Nathan moved quickly, checking behind him. In his hand, a folder, thick with documents. He swiped into Helena's executive suite using a temporary code, one that, by protocol, should have expired last week. Caleb didn't move. He simply watched the door close and made a mental note of the time. 15 minutes later, Nathan exited, no folder in hand. The next morning, Helena found the report missing from her private desk. It wasn't supposed to be there in the first place, just a hard copy Caleb had allegedly sent via anonymous source. She hadn't even told her assistant it existed. Helena's instincts were screaming. She called Nathan. He picked up on the second ring, voice smooth. "Morning, love." "I'm missing a file," she said flatly. There was a pause, half a breath. "You mean your father's old financials?" "No, a printout. It was something I was reviewing. Internal audit." "I haven't been in your office," he replied calmly. "Maybe your assistant moved it?" She didn't respond. "Helena," he added gently, "if something's bothering you, talk to me. Don't shut me out over a missing folder." And there it was again. That voice, that tone. Helena felt the room spin, slowly, imperceptibly, like the floor beneath her feet wasn't as solid as it had once been. That evening, Caleb sat at the guard station, a thermos of black coffee steaming beside him. He looked calm, but inside, everything burned. He knew what he saw, and he knew what it meant. Nathan wasn't just manipulating Helena. He was controlling the board, steering the merger, and, if Caleb's calculations were right, positioning himself to own 51% of the post-merger holding under a shadow company. But he couldn't prove it. Not yet. And with every day, Helena was being pulled deeper into a contract that would cost her everything. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, then opened his notebook, flipped to a clean page, and began a new header. Operation. Red line. He would find the proof. He owed it to his past, and to the woman who, whether she knew it or not, had started listening. The night was unusually still. On the 23rd floor of Hemsworth Tower, most of the lights had gone dark, except for the occasional flicker of motion sensors and the soft glow of the security monitors. It was just past 1 a.m. when Helena stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking softly on the tile. She wasn't supposed to be here. In her hand, a manila folder. No assistants, no guards. Just one name written neatly on a sticky note inside. Caleb Rourke. She found him in the server room. It wasn't where she expected a security officer to be at that hour, but Caleb wasn't ordinary. He sat alone, cross-legged on the floor, a battered notebook open, eyes scanning the hum of the server tower lights, like a man reading the stars. He looked up, startled, but not surprised. "Ma'am?" he asked, rising slowly to his feet. Helena didn't waste time. She extended the folder toward him. "This is a copy," she said. "Original stays with me. I want your eyes on it." Caleb didn't take it immediately. He stared at her for a moment, as if assessing not the document, but the woman herself. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said softly. Helena met his gaze. "I didn't think I'd need to." He took the folder, She followed him to the cramped security office down the hall. It smelled faintly of old coffee and floor polish. A whiteboard hung behind his desk, scrawled with half-erased calculations. On the wall, a photograph of a young girl, Lucy, no doubt, smiling with missing front teeth. Caleb sat down, opened the folder, and flipped through the pages with practiced fingers. Silence filled the room. Helena stood stiffly, arms crossed. For once, she wasn't the one in control, and it made her deeply uncomfortable. Caleb finally looked up. "I don't know why you're really here," he said, voice steady. "Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's guilt. Or maybe you're just starting to wonder what happens when you sign something that can't be undone." He leaned back, eyes sharp now. "But I'll only say what I see, if you're ready to hear the truth." Helena didn't flinch. "I am." Caleb turned the whiteboard around, cleared it in one sweep, and began sketching. "Appendix A, page 14, he said. "Section on equity redistribution. On the surface, it's a standard clause. Post-merger alignment of voting shares." He drew a box. Hemsworth Holdings, then another. Hale Capital, with arrows pointing toward a third box labeled Banyan Key Global Lunti. "This entity, Banyan Key, isn't registered in the U.S., he continued. "It's in the Cayman Islands. It's set up to receive 19% of voting shares post-merger." Helena frowned. "That wasn't in the executive summary." Caleb nodded. "It wouldn't be. It's buried in the footnotes. No mention of Nathan's name. On paper, he doesn't exist here." He tapped the third box. "But the director of Banyan Key is a man named Roland Shea, former partner of Nathan Hale. They co-owned a fintech venture 3 years ago, went bankrupt under allegations of data laundering, swept under SEC review, never made headlines." Helena's eyes narrowed. "How do you know this?" Caleb gave a thin smile. "Numbers don't lie, but people do. And sometimes, they recycle their fingerprints." He flipped the next page in the folder. "Once the merger completes, asset flow begins. Offshore. Slowly. Controlled. Hemsworth becomes the facade. Hale becomes the puppet master." He leaned forward. "You lose your vote, your board, your name." Helena felt her throat tighten. "But why?" she asked quietly. "Why would Nathan do this?" Caleb looked down for a moment, then back up. "Power, control, legacy. Pick your poison. But mostly, because he knows you trust him." A long silence fell. The hum of the server fans filled the room, like the quiet breathing of a sleeping beast. Helena sat down across from him, for the first time in her life unsure of her next move. "I was raised to believe in loyalty," she said softly. "To people, to institutions, to legacies." Caleb studied her face. "I was raised to question everything," he replied. "Even myself." She nodded slowly, then pointed at the whiteboard. "This. Can you build a full report from this?" "I already have," Caleb said. "But it'll need more than math to convince the board." Helena's voice steadied. "Then we show them more." A brief smile crossed Caleb's face. Not smug, but human. The first time she saw warmth in it. "I'll help you," he said, "on one condition." "What is it?" His eyes met hers, calm, unyielding. "When this is over, I walk away with my name cleared. I don't want favors. I don't want a promotion. I just want the truth to outlive me." Helena nodded once. "Deal." And for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. But neither of them noticed the tiny red light blinking beneath the desk, one of the backup surveillance systems. Someone was watching, and they'd just declared war. The rain hit the windows like static. Somewhere below the skyline of Manhattan, taxis honked through puddles, and the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. But inside Helena's penthouse office, time had stopped. She stared at Caleb, her breath shallow, her knuckles white as she gripped the report he had handed her the night before. "You knew," she said. "Didn't you?" Caleb stood still, just inside the door, his posture calm but unreadable. "I suspected," he answered. Helena took a step forward. Her voice, usually icy and composed, cracked at the edges. And yet you waited until a boardroom full of people, until I was about to sign a contract, my company's legacy, to say something? Caleb didn't answer right away. He let the silence hang. You don't think I deserved a private warning? She pressed, her tone rising. A whisper? A message? Something that didn't humiliate me in front of everyone? He met her eyes, but he didn't flinch. I didn't come to embarrass you, Helena. I came to stop a mistake. Helena turned away, jaw clenched. She walked to the large window overlooking the city and let out a slow breath. Her reflection stared back, tired, worn, and no longer as sure of anything. You think you're a hero, she said quietly. Marching in with your little charts and numbers, telling me how blind I've been. Caleb's voice was steady. No, I think I'm someone who saw something wrong and chose not to look away. She spun back around. Or maybe, she snapped, you're just a man who lost everything and now wants to burn down what other people built. The accusation landed like a stone between them. For the first time, something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Pain, maybe, or disappointment. But it didn't last. I've been called worse, he said. By better people. Helena shook her head, almost laughing bitterly. You think I'm the enemy, don't you? Caleb took a slow step forward. No, he said gently. I think you're someone who's trying to survive in a world built by men like Nathan. His voice lowered. I've seen it before. The decorated uniforms, the polished boardrooms, the charming smiles that hide the rot. I've seen what happens when good people convince themselves that silence is professionalism. He paused. And I've also seen what happens when someone finally says no. Helena looked at him, eyes searching. You're still angry, she said. At the military, at the system, at the people who didn't believe you back then. I'm not angry, Caleb replied. I'm awake. Another silence passed. Helena moved to her desk, picked up the report again, and let her fingers run across the header. You ever think, she said slowly, that maybe you're not as right as you think you are? Caleb nodded. Every day. She wasn't expecting that. Her shoulders softened, just a little. I've made mistakes, she admitted, almost to herself. But falling in love with someone shouldn't be one of them. Caleb looked down. No, he said. It shouldn't. Helena closed the file. So now what? She asked, her voice quieter. You walk away with your moral victory? You proved the numbers lie, and I was too blind to see it. Caleb stepped forward, closing the gap between them. I didn't come here to win anything, Helena, he said. But I've been on the other side of silence. I once ignored a chain of transactions that looked off, small, hidden inside a defense subcontractor's report. He looked her dead in the eyes. 3 months later, a bombing in Aleppo killed 27 civilians. The shell fragments matched the contract I overlooked. Helena's breath caught. I told myself it wasn't my fault, Caleb continued, that I was just a financial analyst, that someone else should have caught it. But I knew. He swallowed hard. And I'll never unknow it. Helena sat down, slowly, like someone finally surrendering to a truth they tried to outrun. That's why you said it, she whispered. In the boardroom. He nodded once. Because this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. A tear rolled down her cheek. Silent, uninvited. Caleb turned to leave. But before he reached the door, Helena's voice stopped him. You think I'm weak, don't you? He turned back. No, he said. I think you're scared. And I think scared people are the most dangerous ones, because they still have something to lose. She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. As he left the room, the door clicked softly behind him. Helena sat in silence, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't know which side she was on. It was just after 3 in the afternoon when Helena's car turned the corner by the stone-pillared gates of Westford Elementary. She hadn't meant to be there. At least, that's what she told herself. A last-minute board call had been canceled. Her driver asked if she wanted to head back to the tower, but something had tugged at her, a quiet intuition, or maybe guilt. The school lot buzzed with children, backpacks bouncing, laughter echoing like music from another life Helena barely remembered. She wasn't sure what she expected to see. But then, from the shade of a low tree near the far fence, she caught sight of a small figure sitting alone on a bench, head bowed, shoulders trembling. It was Lucy. Her long chestnut hair was tangled, and she clutched her backpack tightly against her chest. A few kids passed by and whispered something. One boy laughed and pointed. Lucy turned her face further into her sleeve. Helena's steps moved before her mind did. She crossed the lot, heels silent on the walkway. "Lucy," she said gently. The girl stiffened, startled. When she looked up, her eyes were red, her face blotchy. "Ms. Hemsworth," she mumbled, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. Helena knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" Lucy nodded, then shook her head. "Just tired." Helena didn't push. Instead, she sat beside her on the bench. For a moment, they said nothing. The breeze rustled the leaves above. Far off, a bell rang faintly. "I saw some kids teasing you," Helena finally said. Lucy's jaw tightened. "They said my dad just opens doors, that he's nobody." Helena looked ahead, trying to compose herself. "And what do you think?" she asked. Lucy hesitated, then pulled something from her bag, a small, faded photo. It showed Caleb in uniform, standing next to a younger Lucy in a dress 2 sizes too big. Behind them, a banner read, "Welcome home, Captain Rourke." "He used to do big things," Lucy whispered. "He helped stop bad guys who stole money. He helped soldiers get their pay on time. He used to be important." Her fingers tightened around the photo. "But now he just smiles and says good morning and makes sure doors are locked. And people think that means he's nothing." Helena felt a lump forming in her throat. "Your father is far from nothing, Lucy." Lucy glanced up at her, eyes searching. "You believe him, don't you? About the paper? The contract?" Helena didn't answer right away. "I'm learning to," she admitted. Lucy nodded slowly. "He told me something once, when I cried because no one listened to me in class." She looked at Helena again, and this time her voice was clear. "Dad said, if someone dares to tell the truth when no one else believes them, that's what makes them strong." The words hung in the air like a hymn. Helena blinked hard, surprised by the sudden sting behind her eyes. She wasn't sure what hurt more, that a child had to learn such lessons so young, or that the truth of it hit deeper than anything said in a boardroom. Before she could respond, a familiar voice approached. "Lucy!" Caleb's tall figure came into view, walking briskly from the parking lot. He paused, surprised to see Helena there. His sleeves were rolled, keys clipped to his belt, and concern etched his face. "I was coming to get you. Sorry I'm late." Lucy stood and hugged him tight around the waist. Caleb wrapped an arm around her instinctively, then glanced at Helena. "I didn't expect you here," he said, guarded. "I didn't expect myself here either," Helena replied softly. Caleb looked from her to Lucy. "Everything all right?" Lucy nodded, stepping back. "Ms. Hemsworth was just talking to me." Helena stood. She hesitated for a second, then knelt again, this time to meet Lucy at eye level. "Thank you," she said, "for reminding me what real strength looks like." Lucy tilted her head, unsure if it was a compliment or something more. Caleb raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. But there was something softer in his eyes, less suspicion, more curiosity. Helena straightened. "Walk you both to the car?" They walked in silence, Helena beside Caleb, Lucy skipping just ahead, swinging her bag lightly now. As they reached the curb, Lucy turned. "Can I show her my coin?" Caleb looked confused for a second, then smiled. "Go ahead." Lucy reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a shiny challenge coin. The inscription read, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." "My dad got this for saying no to a bad order," she explained. "He said it cost him everything." Helena took the coin and studied it, then looked at Caleb. "And yet," she said, handing it back, "he still gave it to you." Caleb nodded. Some things are worth losing? Helena inhaled sharply. Something inside her shifted, not all at once, but enough to leave a crack in the armor. As they said goodbye, Lucy turned and waved. Bye, Miss Hemsworth. Helena smiled, a rare, honest smile. Bye, Lucy. The car door closed. The engine started. But the words of a child lingered, louder than any boardroom speech or legal clause. If someone dares to tell the truth when no one else believes them, that's what makes them strong. For the first time, Helena wondered if strength wasn't in the deals she closed, but in the truths she dared to face. The boardroom was packed tighter than usual. All 12 members of Hemsworth Global Holdings were seated, suits stiff and expressions neutral. The city skyline glared through the glass walls like a silent jury. Reporters waited outside the lobby downstairs, already tipped off about a possible revelation. Helena stood at the head of the table, calm but pale. Beside her, Caleb remained quiet, a single folder in his hand, numbers and timelines he had memorized, verified, and double-checked for weeks. This was it. After days of private meetings, Helena had made her decision. She would expose the buried Cayman accounts, the manipulated asset values, and the ghost companies all traced back to Nathan Hale, her fiancé, or rather, the man she thought she was going to marry. Behind the polished mahogany table, Nathan sat back with a serene expression. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. He looked relaxed, too relaxed. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice, Helena began, her voice steady. There have been developments regarding the pending merger between Hemsworth Global and Hale Capital that require immediate review. She motioned to Caleb. He opened the folder. I believe, Caleb said, there's compelling evidence suggesting that post-merger asset transfers would have funneled nearly 1/3 of Hemsworth Holdings into an offshore entity not disclosed in the merger documents. This entity is controlled by Mr. Nathan Hale and, pardon me, Nathan interjected gently, tapping his finger on the table. All heads turned. I think, he said, standing slowly, before we entertain allegations, the board should hear something enlightening. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. Helena's heart skipped. Nathan walked to the center of the room, inserted the drive into the presentation screen. The speakers clicked on. At first, it was just silence. Then a recording began to play. Helena's voice. Caleb and I agreed. If this merger goes through, we lose control. But if we act now, we can make sure it doesn't happen. Then Caleb's voice. I've got access. We leak just enough to shake confidence. Let the board doubt. Then she steps in as the savior. The room went cold. Helena's eyes widened. That's not. Nathan raised a hand. Let it finish. More audio followed, cut and stitched. Words said in different meetings, twisted into one damning narrative. Words they had spoken. Yes, but never in that order. Never with that intent. When the recording ended, silence fell like a stone. Helena turned to the board. This was manipulated. You all know me. I would never. We will have to investigate, one of the senior members said carefully. Nathan stepped closer, gaze sympathetic. No one's accusing you outright, Helena, but optics matter. Until we clarify, it might be best for you to step back. The word suspension wasn't spoken. It didn't have to be. Caleb clenched his jaw. She didn't do this, he said firmly. And I never said those things. He's cutting fragments together. And how would you know? Nathan asked smoothly. Were you eavesdropping again? Hacking internal systems during your late-night strolls? He turned to the board. We've already filed a complaint. Digital forensics are underway. The gavel dropped. Not physically, but emotionally, it was deafening. Helena was asked to leave her role, pending review. Caleb received a legal notice the next morning. Unauthorized access. Potential violation of cybersecurity laws. Disciplinary actions to follow. And Lucy? A letter arrived at her school. Her attendance was under review, due to recent media disruptions involving her guardian. The word disruption was underlined. It was subtle. Legal. calculated. Nathan's game was never about fury. It was about precision. Everything had been taken, or so it seemed. Helena sat in her apartment that night, the lights off, phone silent. Her laptop blinked with headlines. CEO suspended amid internal scandal. Merger on hold after secret recording. Emerges romance or rebellion. Fiancé's ties under scrutiny. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't cry. She felt nothing, and that terrified her more than the shame. Across town, Caleb sat on the floor of his small living room. Lucy had curled up on the couch, pretending to watch cartoons, but her eyes were distant. "Are you going to jail?" she asked suddenly. Caleb paused. "No," he said. "Not for telling the truth." Lucy nodded. "Are you sad?" "I'm disappointed," he replied, "but not sad." "Because you didn't lie?" Caleb looked over. "Because I'm not done." He stood and pulled an old notebook from the shelf, his military ledger, the one he hadn't opened in years. Caleb didn't need access to a corporate server. He had something better. Memory. Patterns. And the one thing people like Nathan always forgot. Truth had rhythm. And Caleb? He could hear it. Even in the silence, the elevator hummed as it ascended to the 63rd floor, the same floor where it had all begun. But this time, Helena wasn't wearing a designer dress or heels polished to perfection. No jewelry, no makeup. Just a gray blazer over a simple blouse, her hair tied back. She looked like someone who had lost everything, yet stood ready to fight for what mattered. Beside her, Caleb adjusted his collar, still in his janitor's badge. Security gave him a long stare, but no one dared stop them. News had leaked. There was going to be a meeting, one not scheduled by the board, a private emergency assembly, now public. Caleb clutched the thumb drive in his hand. On it, 2 files. One was the original recording Nathan had twisted and used against them. The other, the transfer logs, offshore accounts, shell corporations, all authenticated, all damning. But none of this would have been possible if not for a man named Sergeant Daniel Kessler, Caleb's old Army comrade, now a military cyber law specialist. 2 days ago, Daniel had shown up at Caleb's apartment with a duffel bag, 2 laptops, and a bottle of cheap bourbon. "You're still garbage at lying, Caleb," he'd said with a grin. "But lucky for you, I'm still good at digging." Daniel had back-channeled into the original communications platform used by Hemsworth's secure conferencing system, an encrypted cloud server partially licensed to a Department of Defense contractor. There, buried beneath firewall protocols, they'd found the full untampered recording, time-stamped, logged, and clean. Caleb hadn't slept since. Now, the boardroom buzzed. The same people who had once looked down on him now whispered his name, some in admiration, others in confusion, a few in fear. Nathan stood near the head of the table, arms crossed. He smirked when Helena entered. "We've already had this meeting, haven't we?" Helena didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the tech assistant. "Please connect the system to the screen." The assistant hesitated, then nodded. The screen blinked. Helena spoke clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today not as your CEO, but as a woman who trusted the wrong person, believed in the wrong ideals, and allowed fear to guide her silence." She paused. "That ends today." She nodded at Caleb. He stepped forward, inserted the drive. The audio began. Not the cut, spliced version they'd all heard. This one was raw. Full context. Helena's voice. "We can't ignore this. If there's even a 1% chance this merger is hiding something." Caleb's voice. "Then we check. Quietly. Honestly. If I'm wrong, I'll disappear." Then silence. Genuine silence. The board members exchanged glances. Some leaned in. One even looked pale. Caleb clicked again. The screen now showed spreadsheets, digital trails, routing numbers, a full flow of assets between Hemsworth Global and an entity named Serif Holdings, a front company in the Cayman Islands, legally registered under Nathan Hale's alternate trust. After the merger, Caleb explained, these funds would have been redirected as investment losses, laundered through third-party shell partners. The shareholders would have never seen a cent. "And who?" asked a board member, voice tight. Verified this data. A new voice chimed in, from the back. Daniel. He stepped into view, wearing his Army Legal Service badge. I did, he said, flashing the document. These records were cross-matched with DoD contractor server archives, fully authenticated. Murmurs erupted. Nathan's face lost its smirk. Objection, he snapped. This is illegal. Unauthorized access, stolen data. You want to talk about illegal? Daniel interrupted. Let's talk about corporate fraud, financial conspiracy, and federal racketeering. A beat. Then came the final blow. Helena pulled out a folder, paper copies. These are signed documents showing Nathan's approval of off-the-record wire transfers, all tied to Serif Holdings. Security began to move in. Mr. Hale, said the board chair, voice sharp. You are no longer welcome on this floor. Authorities have been notified. Nathan turned to Helena, eyes blazing. You think this makes you a hero? You're nothing without my name. Helena didn't blink. Then I suppose I'm finally something. The elevator doors opened. 2 federal agents stepped in, identified themselves, and handcuffed Nathan as gasps spread across the room. Phones snapped photos, even as PR agents begged them not to. In less than 2 minutes, the man once promised to inherit the company was escorted out like a common criminal. When it was all over, silence filled the room again. Caleb unplugged the drive. He didn't smile, didn't linger. He just nodded toward Helena. Good luck. She stepped forward. Caleb, wait. The board wants to. But he was already walking out. Past the room, past the flashing cameras, past the world that had once turned its back on him. That night, in a quiet neighborhood on the city's edge, Lucy opened the apartment door. Her father stepped in, tired but upright. Did you win? She asked. Caleb looked at her, then knelt down. I told the truth, he said softly. Lucy hugged him tightly. And somewhere behind her, the wind chimes on their tiny balcony clinked quietly in the night air. A full month had passed. Hemsworth Global had weathered the storm. Nathan Hale was indicted on 5 counts of corporate fraud and financial conspiracy. The merger with Hale Capital was terminated, and the company's stock slowly began to recover. Yet, amid the boardroom reshuffling, press conferences, and public apologies, one man didn't return. Caleb Rourke declined the invitation to rejoin the company as financial advisor. Helena had offered it twice, once formally, once over dinner with Lucy. Both times he had smiled and said the same thing. I don't need a title to do what's right. And then he'd walked Lucy home, just like always. He still worked the night shift, but only twice a week now. The rest of his time was devoted to tutoring other veterans in financial literacy, helping them navigate pensions, benefits, and the complexity of civilian life. Quiet work, good work. As for Helena, she changed, not in the way tabloids wrote about, not through makeovers or public image resets, but in something far deeper. She started listening. She began sitting in on compliance meetings. She reopened a program to promote internal whistleblower protection, one that Nathan had once buried in red tape. She set up scholarships for daughters of military families, in honor of women like Lucy. And on one cool spring morning, she stood at the entrance of a brand-new glass-walled building next to Hemsworth's Central Tower. It was a small, 2-story space, nothing fancy. But it held over 10,000 books, including business journals, leadership memoirs, financial archives, and even children's novels. Above its door, a bronze plaque read, "The Doorkeeper's Library, in honor of those who see what others ignore." Lucy stood at Helena's side, wearing a white dress and tiny combat boots. Caleb lingered at the edge of the crowd, wearing a soft gray button-down shirt and a slightly crooked tie that Lucy had insisted on tying herself. Helena took the podium. She didn't use a script. When we think of strength, she began, we often picture loud voices, big titles, or polished resumes. But I've learned something else. She paused. Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. Real strength is quiet. It stands in the corner, watching, waiting. Not for attention, but for the moment someone needs protecting. A soft breeze passed through the trees outside. "This building," she continued, "isn't just a library. It's a reminder that sometimes the person who holds the door open might be the only one brave enough to say, 'Don't go in.'" People clapped. Some wiped away tears. Caleb shifted, uncomfortable with the attention. But before he could step back, Helena walked off the stage. She didn't go to the press, didn't greet the executives or board members waiting to shake her hand. She walked straight through the aisle to the very back of the hall, to where Caleb stood. Their eyes met. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. Then, slowly, she extended her hand. Caleb took it. Lucy burst through the space between them and wrapped her arms around both. Her small voice was barely audible, but it pierced through the noise of the world around them. "I'm proud of you, Dad." He bent down, kissed the top of her head, and pulled her close. The sun warmed the glass above as the guests slowly filed into the new library. Caleb didn't follow. He remained at the door, watching. As always, not as a guard, but as a man who'd once lost everything, then found something better. Purpose. Fade to black. Soft music begins. Piano. Low, hopeful. On screen, white text appears. Kindness doesn't need power, just courage. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd truly love to know. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Your reflections matter more than you think. If this story touched your heart even just a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's a simple gesture, but it helps us continue sharing meaningful stories that honor quiet courage, kindness, and the power of second chances. Thank you for spending this time with us. We know your time is precious, and we're honored you chose to spend it here. Until the next story, take good care of yourself.